Have you ever witnessed a lone warrior drifting through space, wielding a sword so powerful it can cripple starships? That scene, where our human hero Damien takes on ruthless pirates outside his ship, dancing between blasts of energy while clutching an ancient blade, is among the most thrilling moments in this tale. But trust me, that's only the tip of the iceberg. From mysterious ruins on alien worlds to a colossal fleet hidden beneath a storm-ravaged planet, every chapter brims with wonder, danger, and the promise of an empire once lost and now rediscovered. If you're curious about how it all plays out, how this remarkable sword changes the destiny of more than one civilization, be sure to check out the entire story from beginning to end. And while you're at it, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Your support helps us bring you even more epic adventures and keeps this community growing. A dark orange sun dipped low in the sky over Kilora Prime, painting the planet's glassy rock formations in hues of russet and bronze. The air had a dry, metallic tinge, a constant reminder of the world's crystalline geology. Damien Holt stood at the brink of a jagged cliff, scanning the sweeping valley below with a discerning gaze. Dressed in a sleeveless tactical vest and reinforced trousers designed to deflect Kilora's sharp crystal outcrops, he presented an imposing figure. His close-cropped black hair glinted in the fading sunlight, and a faint scar across his right cheek gave him an air of rugged confidence that most locals recognized as distinctly human. He breathed deeply, letting the foreign air fill his lungs, pondering how he had come to stand on a planet as strange as this one. Not far behind him, a slim silhouette shifted against the backdrop of luminous quartz shards. Sala Naren, his partner for this expedition, narrowed her violet eyes as she consulted a small handheld scanner. Sala was a native of a deep space colony, but bore the striking traits of her Arventi heritage, a delicate blue sheen to her skin and hair so dark it bordered on obsidian. She moved with a lithe, feline grace, as though the local terrain presented no challenge at all. The dimming sun highlighted subtle markings along her arms, faint patterns that denoted her clan lineage. Damien admired her fluid steps from the corner of his eye, recalling how many times she had saved them both from precarious situations with that same uncanny sure-footedness. "Damien," Sala said, her voice laced with a pleasant musicality that always drew his attention, "you have that look on your face again, the one that says you're about to charge off in entirely the wrong direction." She smirked, tilting her head so her dark hair fell in a neat curtain over one shoulder. The scanner in her hand beeped every few seconds, reading an unusual energy signal that had led them across half the planet. He turned to look at her fully, lips curving into a grin he didn't bother to hide. "Maybe I'm appreciating the view," he replied, not making a secret of how his gaze lingered on her. "And besides, I have a perfectly acceptable sense of direction. You're just too good at correcting my every misstep." She rolled her eyes, a habit she claimed to have picked up from humans, and gestured with her scanner to indicate a route through the glittering valley. "Acceptable is a generous description, Holt. We both know I'm the one keeping us on track." Her scanner flashed a rapid pulse of green lights. "This is where the readings are strongest. The signal is, well, let's just say I've never seen such high spikes before." Damien scanned the wide expanse of crystalline formations. He felt the prickle of anticipation spread through him like an electric current. During their contract work for the Galactic Preservation Guild, they'd uncovered relics from lost civilizations, bits of technology that predated most known interstellar records. But something about this planet's energy felt different, more alive and potent. He gave Sala a short nod. "Lead the way. Let's see just how deep this rabbit hole goes." Sala led them down a narrow pathway carved naturally into the crystalline outcroppings. Every step sent a resonant echo through the ground, as if the planet itself responded to their presence. Translucent shards jutted at odd angles, reflecting their distorted silhouettes back at them. In the distance, a warm wind swept across the crystalline terrain and set the smaller shards singing, creating an otherworldly chorus. Damien was acutely aware that each pitch and tone could potentially mask the footsteps of someone or something following them. Though neither had detected obvious threats, the hush of the valley felt like a coiled spring. Eventually, the path opened into a broader basin scattered with towering crystals that resembled spires of a grand cathedral, each shining with internal luminescence. Sala glanced at her scanner again, brows knitting as she read the data. The signal is definitely closer. It's almost like she paused and held up a hand, motioning for silence. Damien immediately halted, following the line of her gaze. She was studying a single massive block of black stone in the center of the clearing. This stone stood in stark contrast to the shimmering environment, absorbing the sunlight instead of reflecting it. They moved closer. Even from a dozen paces away, Damien felt a faint, rhythmic pulse in the air, like a slow heartbeat emanating from the obsidian monolith. "Does it match anything in your archives?" he asked quietly. Sala shook her head, perplexed. Her scanner gave no consistent readout, just chaotic numbers that made little sense. Finally, they circled the structure to its far side, where they spotted what looked like a handle protruding from the pitch-black surface. Damien's breath caught. Jutting from the stone was a sword, its hilt crafted from some unknown metal that glowed faintly. Strange glyphs lined the blade, each symbol shifting in the light as if dancing at the edge of comprehension. Sala's scanner chirped erratically, unsure how to categorize the readings. The sword itself seemed to vibrate with an undercurrent of power, beckoning. Sala knelt down to examine the monolith, running her slender fingers across the etched runes. "This doesn't look like the typical ceremonial relics we found on other planets," she murmured. "And the stone isn't just obsidian, it's more sophisticated. It absorbs energy like a sponge. Maybe that's why no one has been able to remove the sword. This is likely the artifact that explorers and scholars have been talking about for centuries. The so-called immovable blade." Damien moved closer, unable to resist the sword's silent allure. The rhythmic pulse aligned strangely with his own heartbeats, setting his nerves alight. "You're telling me people have tried advanced scanners, gravity tethers, and quantum lifters on this thing, and no one succeeded?" "That's what the records suggest," Sala replied, straightening back up to her full height. "They even tried disintegration rays, useless. Everyone calls it a cosmic anchor. No technology has ever been able to budge it." Damien exhaled slowly, his gaze fixated on the sword. A wild notion began to form in his mind, equal parts curiosity and daredevil bravado. "What if," he said, keeping his voice steady, "we try something simpler?" Sala arched an eyebrow in a challenge, but a small smile played at her lips. In that moment, under the glow of Calora Prime's setting sun, Damien stepped toward the sword, heart pounding faster with every inch he closed between them. Damien reached out, resting his hand on the sword's hilt with more care than he'd shown any artifact before. Instantly, a jolt of energy traveled through his arm, making every hair on his body stand on end. He half expected the sword to shock him or disintegrate him on the spot. Instead, a warm pulse coursed from his fingertips to his chest, like a wordless greeting. His eyes darted to Sala, who watched with a mix of alarm and fascination. A low hum permeated the space, echoing off the crystal spires around them. Damien tightened his grip. The sword's glow intensified, now radiating a deep cerulean light that made patterns dance across the stone floor. He felt a sudden connection, an intimate bond, as if the artifact recognized something within him. Despite expecting resistance, he found the sword surprisingly cooperative, almost weightless in his grasp. Sala gasped audibly. "Damien, there's a power spike registering off the charts." She stepped forward, raising her scanner again. The device beeped in rapid succession, fluttering like it might overload. "This is beyond anything I've seen in standard catalogs or even restricted files. It's as though the sword is scanning you back." Before either could process the phenomenon, the entire clearing shook. Loose crystal fragments clattered against each other, producing a deafening chime. The monolith holding the sword began to fissure along invisible seams, radiating black cracks that branched outward. Sala stumbled, but quickly regained her balance, pivoting to check on Damien. He remained utterly focused on the artifact, lost in the strange sense of recognition coursing through him. All at once, the sword slid from the monolith with a clean, resonant hiss. Free from its anchor, it hovered for an instant in midair, guided by Damien's hand. Cerulean arcs of light leaped off the blade, crackling across the ground. The black stone base continued to fragment, each piece dissolving into glittering dust. Sala stared in sheer disbelief, her scanner wailing as it tried in vain to quantify what was happening. A single brilliant flash of white consumed Damien's vision. In that fleeting moment, he saw impossible images. A vast human empire spanning countless star systems. Soldiers clad in gleaming exosuits, waging wars against beings of pure darkness. And cosmic monoliths just like this one. Battle fleets soared through the vacuum. An entire world shimmered with advanced citadels he recognized yet had never seen. And through it all, that same blade shone in different hands, each generation passing it on like a sacred legacy. Damien! Sala's voice broke through the vision. He blinked, realizing he'd been teetering unsteadily. She grabbed his arm, her alien eyes wide with concern. Talk to me. Are you okay? He sucked in a sharp breath, the visions fading, but leaving a powerful afterimage behind. I think I just saw a glimpse of a forgotten chapter of human history, he managed, shaking his head to clear the lingering haze. A time when my people were... He paused, searching for words that eluded him. Far more advanced than we are now. Sala's grip on his arm tightened. That sword recognized you, Damien. That much is obvious. But whatever history it's connected to is something the entire galaxy has long forgotten. She glanced at the silent blade, still glowing in his grasp. We need to figure out what this means, and fast. Even as his mind reeled from the vision, Damien's senses sharpened. The ground vibrations had subsided, but a new threat intruded upon the clearing. Distant engine thrums and the faint crackle of radio chatter echoing across the crystalline valley. Sala's expression darkened as she tapped at her wrist module. I'm picking up multiple vessels approaching from the west, she said, voice taut. Looks like local security forces, possibly hired muscle from the Heritage Commission. Damien's jaw clenched. He'd known the moment they stepped on Calora Prime that the Galactic Heritage Commission could be lurking. They had a reputation for hoarding ancient relics, employing mercenaries and enforcement officers to seize artifacts at any cost. Now, with the sword suddenly awakened, there was no doubt it would trigger every alarm on their sensors. We can't let them get their hands on this, he muttered, glancing at the radiant blade in his hand. The cerulean glow had subdued to a faint pulse, but its power still vibrated through him like an unbroken current. Sala moved swiftly, snatching her scanner and stowing it in a compact case at her hip. I've got a stealth ship hidden about 3 clicks east, near a canyon that disrupts sensor sweeps. If we move quickly, we might slip away before they arrive in force. The tight line of her mouth suggested she wasn't entirely confident. Security teams on Calora Prime were notorious for deploying advanced scanning drones. Still, the swirling interference patterns in the planet's crystal fields could work to their advantage. Nodding, Damien reached for a harness loop on his vest. He tried to secure the sword at his back, but it resisted any normal sheath or magnetized clip. Every attempt ended with the weapon slipping free if the blade refused to be confined. Sala's eyes flicked over to him, her expression torn between urgency and a kind of scientific curiosity. Let me see, she said, stepping in closer than usual. Her voice dropped to a near whisper as she helped him adjust a specialized clasp. He felt her steady breath against his shoulder, fueling a spark of tension and familiarity between them. Somehow, under Sala's careful touch, the sword finally settled in a makeshift harness, held by energies he couldn't quite see. With the artifact now secured, though precariously, they exchanged a quick, resolute nod. Together, they dashed from the clearing. The path they'd taken earlier was no longer safe. They could already hear security patrols sweeping the main route. Instead, Sala guided them along a series of jagged ridges that overlooked precipitous drops, counting on the planet's natural residents to mask their movement. A pair of low-flying skimmers roared by overhead, scanning beams lancing into the crystal spires. Damien and Sala pressed themselves flat against a rock ledge, hearts pounding in tandem. They stayed motionless, hearing the hum of anti-grav engines pass uncomfortably close. When the sound receded, Sala exhaled in relief, then motioned for them to continue. If they're sending aerial patrols already, it's only a matter of time before they bring in heavier support. We need to hustle. Damien's gut churned with a blend of exhilaration and dread. The visions he had seen were still vivid, refusing to vanish into memory. He didn't know how or why he had been chosen by this ancient blade, but he did know one thing for certain. Everything in the galaxy would change if the Heritage Commission laid claim to it. They made their way through a network of concealed passages formed by enormous crystalline columns that towered above them like natural skyscrapers. Each structure shimmered with the reflection of distant stars now beginning to pierce the darkening sky. The day's burnt orange light had faded to a coppery dusk, and the scattered glints of pale moonlight on polished stone gave the maze an eerie, dreamlike quality. Sala checked her scanner intermittently, verifying they were avoiding the main search parties. Her lips curled with satisfaction whenever they successfully evaded a patrol. Despite the tension, Damien couldn't ignore the heightened awareness flowing through him since he had lifted the sword. He sensed vibrations in the ground more keenly, as though the planet itself murmured warnings. On 2 occasions, he managed to tug Sala into cover moments before security drones zip out by. Whether it was a byproduct of the sword's energy or some latent ability awakened within him, he didn't know. All he knew was that it felt like more than luck. Sala's honeyed voice broke into his thoughts. We're close to the canyon. Once we're down there, the natural interference should shield our signatures. After that, we can make a beeline to my ship. Damien nodded, pressing a hand against the hilt at his back. The sword's steady pulse offered reassurance he found surprisingly comforting. They scurried through the last stretch of crisscrossing rock formations, descending into a ravine that grew darker and narrower the farther they went. At the bottom, the stone walls flared outward, revealing a hidden gorge. Sala's sleek ship, the Meridian Wind, nestled in the shadows. Angular and predatory, it was crafted for stealth more than cargo, its matte black hull reflecting almost nothing of the environment around it. But just as they began their final sprint, the echo of boots on crystal shattered their moment of relief. 5 armed figures, clearly part of a Heritage Commission enforcement squad, emerged from behind a jagged outcrop. Their helmets bore the Commission's insignia, an ornate star circled by swirling lines, a symbol of their self-appointed mission to preserve galactic history, often through force. The lead figure raised a pulse rifle, the weapon's muzzle glowing ominously in the twilight. "Halt!" The officer's amplified voice ricocheted off the canyon walls. "You are trespassing on restricted territory and in possession of a classified artifact. Surrender immediately or face the consequences." Damien's heart hammered in his chest, though he kept his posture controlled. Sala's eyes narrowed, the faint glow of her clan markings intensifying, her body responding to an adrenaline surge. For a split second, the 2 locked gazes, silently agreeing on a plan without uttering a word. Damien stepped forward, drawing attention to himself. "This artifact isn't yours to take," he said, voice echoing in the canyon, "and we have no intention of handing it over." In that instant, Sala moved with blinding speed, diving behind a rock as the Heritage Patrol opened fire. Bolts of electric blue energy slammed into the canyon floor, sending up sprays of shattered stone. Damien rolled to his left, adrenaline flooding his system. His every instinct screamed, "Protect the sword. Protect Sala. Protect whatever this meant for humankind." The night came alive with the staccato blasts of pulse rifles ricocheting off crystalline walls. Flashes of turquoise and white lit the narrow gorge in frantic bursts. Damien crouched low behind a formation that jutted from the ground like a crooked fang. Each impact left a faint ringing in the air, the crystals amplifying the sounds in disorienting echoes. He clenched his teeth, trying to ignore the overhead whine of the Commission's scanning drones circling like vultures. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted Sala moving in a swift, predatory crouch behind another formation. She pressed a slender hand to her temple, triggering a neural command sequence. Within seconds, 6 spherical devices dropped from a compartment on her belt. They rolled silently across the rocky ground toward the squad, each one projecting a flickering camouflage field that disrupted the patrol's targeting systems. A cluster of shots pelted the ground near Damien's position, forcing him to shift. Gritting his teeth, he unslung the sword from its precarious harness. The moment his fingers closed around the hilt, a surge of awareness sharpened his senses. It wasn't merely adrenaline. It was as though he could feel the vibrations of the commission officers' boots, sense the arcs of their pulse rifles. A low hum resonated from the blade, urging him to act. Damien willed himself to focus. He lunged from cover, and a shimmering aura seemed to radiate from the sword's edge. One officer turned, leveling his rifle, but Damien swung the blade in a tight arc. Instead of the usual metallic clash, an electric crackle signaled that the sword's energy had disrupted the pulse rifle's power core. Sparks danced across the weapon before it fizzled out. The officer scrambled back, shouting in alarm. Across the canyon, two more officers were pinned down by Salah's distraction drones. The illusions caused them to see multiple copies of her darting in and out of cover. Her actual self advanced swiftly, a small firearm in hand. She shot precise, non-lethal bursts that rendered the officers unconscious before they even realized which Salah was real. Glancing at Damien, she gave him a swift nod, silently checking his status. But their confrontation was far from over. The lead officer, a tall, broad-shouldered figure with gold sergeant stripes, managed to skirt around the drones, barking orders into a comlink. HQ, be advised. We have visual contact with the artifact. It's active. Repeat, it's active. A beat later, the distinctive roar of approaching dropships filled the ravine. They were about to be outnumbered 10-1. Damien exchanged a tense look with Salah. We've got to move now. With the sword still humming in his grasp, he sprinted toward the meridian wind. Salah followed, covering their rear with a few well-placed shots that forced the remaining patrol members into hiding. Laser fire scoured the canyon walls behind them, showering them in a haze of sparkling crystal shards. They reached the vessel's ramp just as searchlights from the newly arrived dropships started sweeping across the gorge. Once inside the cockpit, Salah slapped the door controls, sealing them in. The engines roared to life, and the ship's thrusters lit up with a muted blue glow, swirling dust in every direction. Damien slid into the co-pilot's seat, sword in hand. Let's hope your stealth tech is as good as you say, he told Salah, pulse hammering. Salah's fingers flew over the glowing console, activating the Meridian Wind's stealth systems. As the engines rumbled, she guided the ship up and out of the canyon, weaving through tight spaces like a seamstress threading a needle. Outside the cockpit's reinforced glass, golden searchlights pierced the darkness, scanning desperately for any trace of their craft. But Salah's modifications, cloaking fields and sensor-baffling emitters, ensured they lifted off nearly invisible to standard detection arrays. Damien exhaled, trying to steady his adrenaline-fueled pulse. He balanced the ancient sword across his lap, still feeling its soft, rhythmic thrum. They won't give up that easily, he muttered, glancing back through the cockpit at the receding glow of Calora Prime's crystal formations. He imagined security squads storming down the ravine, desperately combing through shadows in the hopes of finding them. He felt a twinge of relief that, for the moment, they were a step ahead. Damn right they won't, Salah replied, toggling a series of thruster controls. Her posture was relaxed, almost nonchalant, despite the tension. The Heritage Commission invests heavily in ancient tech acquisitions. They've collected everything from pre-space artifacts to entire libraries of lost planetary histories. Now, after seeing what that sword just did, they'll be in a frenzy. She gave Damien a sidelong glance. In other words, we made the top of their priority list. Damien's gaze dropped to the blade. It's not just about collecting, but they either want to weaponize it or ensure no one else can. It almost feels like the sword is more than an artifact. It's a message or a key. He couldn't articulate the overwhelming visions he'd experienced in precise terms, but the notion that his people had once been far more advanced burned in his thoughts. The memory of starships and battles against a writhing darkness gave him chills. A tremor ran through the vessel as it broke the atmosphere. Calora Prime's swirling cloud layers parted, revealing the depths of space scattered with distant, shimmering stars. On the ship's sensors, several smaller craft had already begun pursuit, though they were still distant. Salah rolled her shoulders and tapped into a pre-programmed route. Let's see if we can lose them in the asteroid belt around Calora's sister planet. After that, I have a few obscure warp lanes we can jump to. Should cut our tail. As they soared higher, a wave of calm settled over Damien. He ran his fingertips along the glyphs etched into the sword's blade. They were mesmerizing, constantly shifting as if alive. A fleeting sense of recognition teased at him, like a half-remembered dream. Sala, you ever hear any legends about humans wielding weapons no other species could even touch? She tilted her head thoughtfully, weaving them around fragments of cosmic debris. In the Arventi archives, there's mention of a lost human empire, but the references are always vague, talking about ephemeral guardians or watchers who shaped the galaxy's early eras. Most historians consider it myth. They say humans were once cosmic nomads, or that you arrived from beyond known space. Her lips curved in a small smile. After what I just saw, I'm beginning to think you might be the stuff of legends. A mixture of pride and unease tugged at Damien's gut. Whatever the truth is, we need answers, he said, then paused. We also need a plan. That commission squad won't be the last we see. Sala nodded in agreement. Agreed. We'll start by heading to the remote sectors. I know a place beyond the Federation's usual patrol routes, a place rumored to hold secrets about pre-galactic civilizations. If there's any clue out there about your empire or about this sword, that's where we'll find it. Damien glanced out at the brilliant starscape unfolding before them. A rare surge of optimism coursed through him, mingling with a bone-deep apprehension. He had no idea what cosmic forces he might have just awakened, nor how profoundly it would affect his own species' future in the galaxy. But for the first time in his life, he felt like he was standing at the threshold of a destiny far larger than himself. And he wasn't standing there alone. The meridian wind tore across the void in a streak of muted black, a whisper of movement detectable only if one happened to know precisely where to look. In the pilot's seat, Sala maintained a hawk-like focus on the control panel, subtly guiding the craft just beyond the gravitational rim of Calora Prime. She monitored the sensors for signs of pursuit, although she fully expected to see a cluster of blips converging on their location at any moment. The Heritage Commission was nothing if not relentless, and a relic of this magnitude would set their operatives abuzz for months. Damien, seated at her side, couldn't shake the feeling that he was running on borrowed time. The ancient sword lay propped against the panel, pulsing faintly with each passing minute. "Any tales?" Damien asked, his voice low, mindful of how easily tension could spike under these circumstances. He reached up to brush a fresh scrape on his brow, a souvenir from diving for cover in that canyon firefight. Despite the adrenaline still coursing through him, he felt a weighty undercurrent of certainty. Their trouble was only beginning. Sala blew out a measured breath. A couple of smaller ships, but they're too far off to get a lock. Looks like the Commission tried to scramble more interceptors, but none can match the stealth tech I've got installed. The lines of worry in her expression eased slightly as she tapped in a new trajectory. I'm taking us toward the Ruby Drift, that swath of crimson nebula that sprawls between here and the outer systems. Pirates roam that region, but so do 100 sensor distortions perfect for hiding. Damien nodded. It's risky territory. Then again, everything we do with this sword seems to come with a healthy side of risk. Even though he tried for levity, his concern was genuine. The Ruby Drift, known among smugglers and privateers as a place where ships vanished as often as cargo changed hands, was a labyrinth of swirling red-tinged gases laced with asteroids and unsettled gravitational eddies. A single miscalculation could lead to a catastrophic collision, but he also recognized they had few options. The Commission would assume they'd jump directly toward the Federation borders or known outposts. Slipping into a danger zone might be the last thing they'd expect. Sala angled her head toward him. I've used the drift before to evade bounty hunters. We might encounter pirates, but the real worry is that they'll see the sword, realize what it can do, and decide we're worth more than just a standard shakedown. Her tone made it clear she didn't relish the thought of tangling with cutthroats in a sector as lawless as that. Damien carefully lifted the sword, tracing the ornate glyphs along the blade with a reverent caution. I don't intend to showcase it, he said softly. The relic's power still thrummed in his veins, and part of him wondered if they could survive another conflict so soon. If we play our cards right, no one has to know what we're carrying. That's the plan, Sala replied, initiating the burn that propelled them away from Calora Prime's gravity well. Outside the viewport, the planet shrank into the distance. But with a secret like this, sometimes the galaxy has a way of finding out regardless. Hours later, the meridian wind glided into the hazy reaches of the Ruby Drift. What had once been a region of fiery red stellar ging and swirling debris now appeared as an eerie crimson sea of half-lit shapes. Flickers of distant lightning illuminated fractured asteroid clusters that drifted in slow, elliptical orbits. Sala deftly steered the ship along a route she claimed to have memorized from past illicit jobs, when her knack for sneaking through danger had saved her more than once. Damien rose from his seat to stretch his cramped legs, carefully maintaining his balance as micro-adjustments in the ship's gravity plating caused subtle floor vibrations. Sliding the sword into a makeshift sling he'd rigged along his shoulder, he wandered to the cabin's rear to check on their supplies. In truth, his mind wasn't on rations or spare parts. Instead, half-remembered images from the sword's vision looped in his thoughts. Rows of advanced warships, starlit battlefields stretching across light years, and a triumphant yet tragic empire of humans that had once been the galaxy's guardians. The question that gnawed at him was, what had happened to them? If humankind had once soared among the stars as protectors, how had they fallen so far into obscurity? He was so lost in reverie that he nearly missed the faint beep of the ship's proximity alert. A second beep followed, more insistent this time, snapping him from his mental haze. He rushed back into the cockpit, where Sala's eyes were locked on the sensor readouts. Their once empty scanner display now showed 3 contacts, vessels with transponders disabled, emerging from the swirling gas clouds. Guess who decided to pay us a visit? Sala's voice dripped with sardonic amusement, though tension lined her features. Pirates, by the look of their formation. They're sweeping the drift lanes for unsuspecting haulers or hapless travelers. Damien set his jaw. Think they've spotted us? As if in answer, a bolt of plasma fire grazed past the starboard side of their hull, sending sparks arcing across the void. The meridian wind rocked slightly, and Sala's hands flew to the controls, engaging a pattern of evasive maneuvers. "Oh, I'd say that's a yes," she muttered, ramping up the engines. A second and third volley of green-white plasma tore through the nebula, barely missing them but leaving bright scars in the drifting red haze. Damien gripped the back of Sala's chair, knuckles whitening. "Can we outmaneuver them in here?" He could see the swirl of eddies and gravitational anomalies on the readouts. Though useful for hiding, they posed equal risk if they attempted to fly at top speed. "I can try," Sala replied tersely. "The drift's unpredictability gives me an edge. Been here before, remember?" She banked the ship hard to the left, drawing a grimace from Damien as G-forces pressed him to the cabin wall. The first pirate ship zipped past, overshooting them by a wide margin. For a moment, it appeared they might slip away, undetected, deeper into the fog of the drift. But that hope quickly dissipated when a second vessel swung into their path. Larger than its companion, it bristled with weapon emplacements welded onto mismatched plating. Even from a distance, Damien could sense the pilot's skill as they lined up a shot. Another sizzling plasma bolt streaked close, rattling the cockpit's displays with electromagnetic interference. "What's the plan now?" he asked through clenched teeth. Sala's face hardened with resolve. "We improvise." Improvisation in that moment meant pushing the meridian wind to the limits of its design. Sala diverted extra power to maneuvering thrusters, weaving through clusters of tumbling asteroids that slid past in staccato bursts of motion. The swirling red mists played havoc with sensor readings, so she relied on a honed instinct and partial memory of the local gravity pockets. One missed calculation would slam them into a 1,000-ton rock or send them spiraling into an uncharted vortex. Behind them, the pirate ships maintained dogged pursuit. Their captains, evidently more experienced than the average raider, compensated for the drifting anomalies, fanning out to box in the smaller craft. Damien watched on the secondary monitor as the triangular outlines of hostile vessels closed in from multiple angles. The tension in his gut coiled tighter. Sala let out a quick curse. "They're corralling us. I've seen that formation before. They'll drive us into a pocket where gravitational distortions are highest, then force us to cut engines. Once we're sitting ducks, they'll board us." Damien squared his shoulders. The sword's presence was a comforting weight at his side, though he had no illusions about how much help it would be from inside the cockpit. "Then we'd better switch to a plan they don't expect," he said, voice steely. "I'll do it." He didn't need to elaborate. Sala's eyes flicked to him, then to the sword. "Are you insane? Doing that in a stable environment is crazy enough. But out here in the middle of the drift, she trailed off, worry etched in every syllable. He tried a reassuring smile. If we don't do something drastic, they'll have us pinned. Trust me. He squeezed her shoulder gently before sprinting to the rear airlock. By now, the hull reverberated with near misses, each impact of plasma stirring the metallic skeleton of the ship. Sala's voice echoed over the internal comm system, giving him updates on their flight path, her own fear and faith mingling audibly. Damien slipped into a lightweight vacuum suit, shrugging it on over his tactical vest. The sword, brimming with a kind of otherworldly electricity, did not protest as he carefully tethered it to the suit's harness. Another volley of cannon fire reverberated, and he grimaced, praying that Sala's reflexes would keep them in one piece just a bit longer. "I'm cycling the airlock," Sala called, the faintest tremor in her voice. "You'd better come back in one piece, Holt." Damien smirked, though no one saw it. "You can't get rid of me that easily," he replied, initiating decompression protocols. An eerie silence descended as the chamber equalized pressure, followed by the soft hiss of the outer hatch. Then he was drifting in open space, tethered only by a thin cable to the ship's hull. The ruby drift unfurled around him like a crimson ocean of swirling awe and drifting debris. Sparks of cosmic lightning danced in the distance, illuminating the silhouette of the pirate vessels, hulking, kit-bashed monstrosities that reminded him of twisted sea creatures on an ancient Earth map. Sighting the nearest target, he triggered the small thrusters on his suit's belt, propelling himself away from the meridian wind with a controlled burst of energy. If all went well, he intended to demonstrate what a relic from a forgotten empire could do in the vacuum of space. As the microthrusters propelled him forward, Damien felt his pulse hammer in his ears, the only sound echoing within the confines of his helmet. Vast shadows drifted through the bloody haze, each representing an asteroid fragment or a piece of pirate hardware. He steered himself around bits of rock and ice, angling closer to the nearest hostile vessel. A slender, spined craft bearing mismatched plating and bristling with external turrets. Its cockpit glowed faintly, revealing silhouettes scuttling about inside. Clutching the sword in his gloved hand, he wondered if it would respond in the vacuum. He recalled how the blade had ignited on Calora Prime, resonating as though with its own consciousness. Now, without gravity or atmosphere, would it retain the same potency? Would he be left brandishing nothing more than a decorative relic? He needn't have worried. The moment he tightened his grip, a brilliant azure glow erupted along the blade's length. Tendrils of luminescent energy shimmered, extending outward to form a cutting edge that defied the vacuum. Damien's breath caught. He hadn't witnessed anything quite like this. In the faint reflection of his visor, he saw his eyes illuminated by the same electric hue. He aimed himself toward the pirate vessel's engine array. If he could disable or cripple it, the meridian wind might just escape. Flattening himself against a chunk of tumbling rock for cover, he waited for a gap in the turret's line of fire. Then, timing his thrust with a lull in the vessel's movement, he propelled himself forward, sword ready. An alarm must have sounded on board, because one of the turrets swiveled his way, discharging a searing bolt of plasma into the darkness. Damien rolled, narrowly evading the shot, and slashed with the sword. A ripple of gravitational force rippled through the vacuum, nearly jerking him off balance. The blade's energy coalesced into a crackling wave that slammed into the turret. Metal plating warped as though caught in a vortex, then crumpled inward with a silent implosion. Lights flickered, and the turret ceased firing. Stunned, Damien hovered for a half-second, adrenaline thrumming. Even from outside, he heard Sala's exclamation through the comm. "What in the world are you doing out there? It's lighting up every sensor in the system." A second turret rotated, spitting more plasma blasts. Damien gritted his teeth and reversed his course, using short bursts from his thruster belt. Another slash of the sword unleashed a wave of glowing arcs that rippled across the vessel's hull. The hull plating groaned beneath invisible pressure. One of the primary thrusters sputtered, then exploded in a shower of sparks that scattered like fireflies in the swirling red mist. In the distance, a second pirate craft abruptly halted its pursuit of the meridian wind, evidently transfixed by the spectacle of a lone figure shredding its partner's systems. Damien realized that if one ship was astonished, the other would soon adapt. He needed to press his advantage quickly, then get back to Sala before the pirates could rally. He clenched the hilt tighter, blood pounding in his ears. Just a little more, he muttered, launching himself along the crippled vessel's flank. If he could force it to crash into the debris field, or at least float incapacitated, they would have a chance to slip away. The crippled pirate vessel listed dangerously, sparks dancing across its battered hull. Damien seized his chance. With a final thrust of the sword, he unleashed a focused pulse that reverberated through the vacuum. He could almost feel the energy vibrating through his gloves. An eruption of debris signaled that the ship's engine couplings and maneuvering thrusters had reached catastrophic failure. Slowly, inexorably, the vessel drifted toward a massive rock formation swirling amid the crimson fog, its crew no doubt scrambling to prevent a fatal collision. Damien exhaled, letting a momentary thrill of triumph wash over him. Then, from the corner of his visor, he glimpsed the second pirate craft, a heavily armored corvette, bearing down. It launched a salvo of small missiles that streaked silver through the ruby haze, homing in on him rather than on the disabled ship. He had only seconds to react. Kicking his thrusters, he veered upward, weaving between the elongated shards of space ice that drifted near the largest asteroid. Two missiles slammed into a chunk of debris behind him, exploding in a burst of superheated shrapnel that pinged against his suit. The third missile shot past, missing him by the width of a palm. "Damien, talk to me," came Sala's urgent voice. "I'm tracking multiple projectiles in your vicinity. You're going to have half the drift chasing you in seconds." Breathing hard, he toggled his comm. "I'm still in one piece. It looks like I made one of the ships punch out, but the second is adjusting to my tactics." Another jerk of his thrusters brought him a precarious vantage point, balanced on a slowly spinning asteroid. Through the swirling nebula gases, he could see the meridian wind at a distance, evading the pirate's third vessel. Despite her best efforts, Sala appeared hard-pressed to avoid direct engagement. "I'll disable this corvette's weapons if I can. Then I'll get back. Be ready." He lunged off the asteroid, sword blazing in his grip. The corvette's cannons charged, readying a vicious barrage. Damien pushed the thrusters to their limit. He streaked through the vacuum like a meteor. Arms braced to slash. The corvette's outer hull bristled with spines that hissed jets of scorching plasma, but he wove past them. Each pass from the sword unleashed arcs of shimmering force, slicing through plating as though it were paper. On the final approach, he angled for the main turret assembly, fully aware that a single well-placed shot could incinerate him. With a roar trapped behind the confines of his helmet, he swung downward. The sword's azure aura flared a brilliant white, ripping through steel and composite alloys in a cataclysmic shower of sparks. An instant later, the turret's core erupted, flinging bits of molten metal out into the nebula. Alarms blared within the corvette, accompanied by frantic lights that strobed from behind the hull's few intact windows. He had done significant damage, though not enough to fully neutralize it. Satisfaction proved short-lived. The corvette vented a wave of metallic micro-shrapnel in a final desperate attempt to shake him off, an improvised countermeasure that glinted a dull silver in the faint starlight. Tiny needles pelted his suit, tearing at outer layers. Gritting his teeth, Damien shut his visor's shutters against the onslaught. Shrapnel clanged off his thruster pack, nearly sending him spinning. One vicious piece lodged near his left shoulder, punching through the suit's plating and drawing a grunt of pain. Dark spots swam in his vision, and panic surged. If the suit lost pressure, he had only minutes. Flicking the thrusters once more, he managed to drift away from the corvette's hull, which was now venting atmosphere in short bursts. Gotta get back," he panted, forcing a level tone into his comm. "Sala, I'm done here. Pick me up quick." The meridian wind swooped in low, guided by Sala's steady hands at the helm. She had shaken off the remaining pursuer, likely more distracted by its crippled allies than determined to finish the fight. With practiced timing, Sala angled the cargo bay ramp toward Damien's drifting form, matching his slow spin so he could latch onto the extended docking tether. Weakened by blood loss and oxygen depletion, he fumbled, but managed to secure the cable around his waist. "Sala, reel him in!" He heard her own voice echo through the comm, as though she were talking to herself in her hurry. Alarms bleeped in the background. The ship trembled every so often with near-miss blasts from the final pirate craft, but Sala held course. Inch by inch, Damien was hauled back toward the open ramp. Clutching the sword with one arm, he groped at the ramp's side panel with the other as soon as he was within reach. The moment he crossed the threshold, the bay doors slammed shut. Atmosphere rushed in with a hiss, and gravity reasserted itself as the internal stabilizers kicked on. Damien slumped to the deck, the sword clattering next to him. Red emergency lights painted everything in a lurid glow. Sala scrambled from the cockpit. Kneeling at his side, she yanked a medical kit off the bulkhead and tore open the package. "Damien, can you hear me?" she demanded. Her voice cracked with worry. He exhaled a ragged laugh, wincing at a fresh bolt of pain in his left shoulder. "Next time, I'll just wave politely at the pirates from inside." Despite the agony, relief seeped in. He was on board, Ellie and the sword was still in their possession. Sala bit her lip, hooking him up to a field bandage that sealed the puncture. The hiss of biofoam made him grimace, but it swiftly numbed the wounded area and prevented further blood loss. "You're lucky," she said softly, sweeping dark hair out of her eyes. "A few centimeters closer, and that shard would have hit bone or cut a major artery. You'd be floating out there, lifeless." He forced a smile, meeting her eyes. "Then I owe you dinner, wherever we eventually end up." A teasing glint shone in his gaze, but it was undercut by the seriousness of their circumstances. "Just focus on healing." She took a moment to run a scanner over him, confirming the pressure suit hadn't lost too much atmosphere. "I'm taking us to the outer edge of the drift. By the time the pirates recover, we'll be long gone. With luck, they'll have bigger problems repairing their own hulls." Damien nodded, letting his head roll back against the corrugated metal floor of the cargo bay. The subtle hum of engines reassured him that Sala was already piloting them away. Another wave of exhaustion crashed over him, pulling him dangerously close to unconsciousness. He cast one last glance at the ancient sword lying next to him, the soft pulsing glow now subdued, as if the weapon too needed to rest after its display of power. His final coherent thought, before surrendering to the darkness, was a renewed sense of awe and trepidation. If such destruction could be wreaked on a few ragtag pirate ships, what might it do under the command of someone truly ruthless? When Damien next awoke, he was in a bunk near the rear of the ship, a faint ache radiating from his bandaged shoulder. The overhead lighting had been dimmed to a soft amber, and the faint hum of engines told him they were in transit at sublight speed. A quick glance around confirmed he was alone, though a small readout at the bunk's edge indicated the ship's autopilot was active. He gingerly swung his legs over the side, noticing how each movement sent a dull throb through his wound. He found Sala in the cockpit, eyes intently locked on navigation screens. She barely registered his entrance until he cleared his throat. "How long was I out?" "About 5 hours," she answered, subdued. "I set a course for what I call the Acheron Corridor, a series of hidden routes that lead to an isolated corner of the galaxy. It's near a system rife with ion storms, a natural phenomenon that tends to keep big organizations away. No Federation patrols, no commission, no easy routes in or out." She shot him a brief look, relief flickering behind her violet irises. "How's the shoulder?" "Sore but manageable," he admitted, leaning against the co-pilot's chair. He was conscious of how close they were, how the narrow confines of the cockpit made their personal boundaries blur. "Thank you. If you hadn't reeled me in so fast, well..." He left the sentence unfinished. Gratitude shone in the way he let his hand rest softly on the chair's back. Sala inclined her head. "We're partners. I look out for you, you look out for me. That's how it's always been." She tried for a small smile, but it lacked her usual teasing spark. Instead, her gaze slid past him to the sword, which he carried in one hand, careful not to jostle it. "Whatever that thing is, it's linked to something bigger. Maybe bigger than any of us can comprehend." I've seen technology my entire life. Cloaking fields, neural implants, wormhole stabilizers, but never something that can do all that. Damien followed her gaze, letting the sword's faint light glide across the cockpit's walls. The same shifting glyphs ran down its length, each symbol dancing away when he tried to look too closely. "It might hold answers about who humans used to be," he said, recalling those fleeting visions of starships and cosmic wars. But it also raises more questions. Why was it left there, anchored in a block of that black stone? And why could no one else move it until I came along? Sala shook her head, crossing her arms. Well, from the data we've gathered, it seems like it reacts specifically to your genetic signature, to your presence and maybe your emotional state. That's not a coincidence. Someone or something wanted it that way. She drew a slow breath, letting the idea hang. Then flicking a switch, she brought up a hollow map of the Acheron corridor. We're about a day's flight from a planet called Aziria, known for its perpetual storm systems. I've never landed there. Nobody has, at least not successfully. But an old rumor suggests there's an outpost or ruin tied to the earliest expansions of the galaxy's major races. Damien felt a jolt of recognition at the mention of storms, as though the sword's hidden knowledge resonated inside him. Then that's where we go. If the sword can part cosmic debris and tear through ships, maybe it can help navigate the storms. He gave Sala a meaningful look. I need to know more about this ancient empire, and something tells me Aziria has a piece of the puzzle we're missing. She turned to face him fully, the tension in her posture momentarily easing. All right then, we braved the storms of Aziria. I guess we're no strangers to defying the odds. As the starfield drifted by outside, both felt the echo of fate breathing down their necks, an unseen hand guiding them to the center of a long-forgotten truth that would shake the foundations of the galaxy itself. Gliding out of faster-than-light travel, the meridian wind emerged into orbit above Aziria. The planet's atmosphere was a perpetual swirl of bruise-colored cloud formations, cracked through by forks of brilliant white lightning. Even from space, Damien and Sala could see the storms thrashing across the surface like restless serpents, churning in ceaseless patterns that defied any simple meteorological explanation. Aziria's sun glowed weakly in the distance, providing little clarity against the planet's thick haze. Most star charts mark this world as unreachable, a place where even the bravest cargo runners refuse to land. Despite the ominous spectacle, something within Damien stirred, an inexplicable sense of belonging, as though the storms themselves were calling. He stood behind Sala's chair, one hand on the back of her seat, the other clutching the ancient sword that had already reshaped his destiny. Over the past day, the blade's glyphs had pulsed with growing intensity, as if in anticipation of what lay below. When Sala engaged the ship's sensors, the readouts flickered with odd data, energy spikes, gravitational anomalies, even fleeting hints of structures on the planet's surface. Every piece of intel clashed with the widely held belief that no one, human, Arventi, or otherwise, had ever built anything viable down there. So much for a barren wasteland, she mused, eyes scanning the console. We've got faint metallic signatures, stable architectural angles, definitely signs of an ancient complex or city. I'm reading power surges too. They're cyclical, matching the storm's rhythms. It's almost as if the planet has built-in defenses. She turned to Damien, a questioning spark in her violet irises. You still sure we should land? If the turbulence doesn't kill us, the lightning might. Damien's gaze dropped briefly to the sword. Its glow brightened as they drew nearer, each pulse in perfect sync with the heartbeat thrumming in his chest. That's exactly why we need to try, he said, voice steady. Whatever's down there is connected to this sword, and to some lost era of human history. If we walk away now, we might be leaving behind the only real answers we've come across. Sala exhaled, then tapped a sequence into the flight control. All right, I'll try to push us through, but the second I think we're about to be vaporized, I'm pulling us out. She paused, giving him a wry grin. I'm growing too attached to you, Holt. Not about to let you get us both killed on a hunch, no matter how magical that relic seems. Damien returned the smile with warmth. In the last few days, they had risked more than many teams did in a lifetime, forging a bond tested in gunfire and cosmic anomalies. Fair enough, he said. Just be ready for whatever comes next. With that unspoken promise, Sala initiated a descent path. Engines roared in protest as swirling winds buffeted the hull. Alarms pinged every few seconds, warning of dangerous gusts and atmospheric instability. Lightning hammered past them, strands of white-hot plasma arching like living beings. Yet each time a bolt threatened to strike, the sword's glow would intensify, and the near impact veered aside at the last moment, as if repelled by an unseen field. Wide-eyed, Sala guided the ship lower, weaving around cloud formations that felt more like cosmic maelstroms than typical weather systems. Finally, the meridian wind broke through the last band of churning clouds, emerging above a battered landscape marked by jagged rock spires. In the distance, a faint luminescence shimmered through the sheets of rain, suggesting a sprawling structure that defied the storm's chaos. Whatever that is, Sala breathed. It's big. Guided by the sword's increasing luminescence, Sala located a plateau on which to land. Wind shear fought them every meter of the way, and more than once she had to blast the engines at full power just to hover in place. At last, with a final growl of effort, the meridian wind touched down in a pocket of relative calm. Rain swept sideways in sheets, drumming against the hull like a relentless army of tiny fists. Outside the cockpit windows, the swirling gloom concealed everything beyond a few dozen paces, lit only by the occasional strobe of lightning. The moment the landing gear settled, Damien unbuckled and stood, ignoring the persistent ache in his shoulder from the last scuffle with the pirates. He slung the sword across his back, feeling its energy vibrate through him. "We won't have long before the storm intensifies again," he noted. "Let's hope there's some shelter in that structure we saw from above." Salavala ran a final systems check. "Ship is on partial lockdown. The external sensors are basically blind, but I've rigged an alarm if anything large approaches. We can't stay out here too long. The winds could pick up enough to flip the entire vessel." Her voice carried a determined edge. As daunting as Aziria was, her curiosity about the planet's secrets almost rivaled her caution. They suited up in reinforced jackets and environmental masks designed to withstand extreme weather. A single press of the cargo bay controls later, and the ramp lowered with a grinding hiss. Rain pelted them immediately, even though the overhead canopy offered some protection. Lighting flickered in the distance, revealing glimpses of twisted rock formations looming like dark sentinels. Stepping forward, Damien braced himself for the gale. The wind howled, threatening to knock them off balance. But a subtle ring of cerulean radiance flared around the sword, creating a buffer that kept the worst of the storm at bay. Sala flashed him a look of amazement behind her visor. "I can feel it. The pressure's less where we're standing, but I can't figure out how that's even possible." Nonetheless, she walked beside him, each step firm and purposeful. They moved across the plateau, scanning for any sign of an entrance or a pathway. The haze of rain made it difficult to see more than a few meters. Still, the sword pulsed brightly whenever they turned in a particular direction. Step by step, they followed that intangible guidance until the rocky surface gave way to an enormous doorway carved directly into the side of a cliff face. The door itself appeared to be fashioned from a smooth, slate-colored alloy that looked remarkably intact despite centuries, perhaps millennia, of violent storms. Damien tested the door, half expecting it to remain sealed, but a soft chime sounded. Runes along the frame glowed faintly, responding to the sword's presence. With a reverberating groan, the colossal slab slid aside, revealing a yawning corridor that delved deep into the planet's crust. Stale air rushed out, mingling with the rain in a brief swirl of mist. Exchanging a look that combined both exhilaration and trepidation, they stepped inside. The storm's roar muffled as the doors sealed behind them, leaving only the soft hum of ancient machinery echoing in the gloom. Whatever lay ahead was older than any records they had seen, and the sword's radiance hinted that they were exactly where they needed to be. The interior corridor extended far beyond the range of their helmet lamps, but overhead strips, long dormant by the look of them, began to flicker to life under the sword's influence. One by one, pale blue lights illuminated a path forward, casting shimmering reflections on metallic walls that bore glyphs and murals reminiscent of those etched into the blade. Sala moved slowly, scanner in hand, the device pinging softly at intervals as it tried to interpret data that was centuries, if not eons, out of date. This entire facility, whatever it is, must be powered by a core that's still functional, she murmured, awestruck. She paused at a curved wall, tracing a line of raised symbols with her gloved fingertips. Everything here is reminiscent of archaic Terran designs, but it's also centuries more advanced. Look at these lines. They're not purely decorative. They channel energy. Damien nodded, remembering the visions he had experienced. It's like these walls are part of a giant circuit, he said, lips quirked with faint wonder. The corridor soon opened into a vast atrium, circular in shape, with a domed ceiling that soared overhead. In the center stood a colossal statue of a human figure in flowing robes, one hand extended in a gesture of protection, the other clutching a sword identical to the one Damien now carried. Talk about a welcome, Sala said, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. Her scanner beeped excitedly, but the readings were so far off the scale that it flashed error messages. Around them, also hollow panels flickered to life, revealing star maps of an older galaxy, a galaxy with fewer charted trade lanes but more uniform markings in certain regions. Damien's gaze traced the lines, a strange déjà vu tugging at his mind. Each star cluster displayed symbols he recognized from the sword's inscriptions, as though they had once been under a unified banner. A sudden hum of machinery made them both jump. In the atrium's far wall, a set of massive doors slid open and a mechanism rose from the floor, a circular platform that looked like an elevator. The platform emitted a gentle, pulsing glow, matching the sword's own light. With silent agreement, Damien and Sala approached it. The moment they stepped onto the platform, it began to lower, carrying them into the depths of the facility at a steady pace. As they descended, murals on the wall recounted a grand narrative, etched in stylized relief. Damien's eyes roamed across scenes of humans standing alongside various alien species, forging alliances. Then darker panels showed rifts in space, tentacled horrors emerging from inky voids. In one depiction, a fleet of sleek warships, each marked with the same glyph on the sword, fired beams of brilliant energy at monstrous silhouettes. The final panels depicted a catastrophic battle, culminating in an exodus, countless human figures departing for unknown regions, leaving their technology behind in hidden vaults. Sala sucked in a quiet breath. This must be the story of what happened to that advanced human empire, she whispered, half in awe. They fought things from beyond normal space, and they either won or drove them off, but paid a terrible price. Then they hid all of this. Damien's heart pounded as the platform slowed to a halt. It's more than a relic, he said, gripping the sword tighter. This place, this world, was a final refuge, and the sword, it's a key to awaken what they left behind. A sense of inevitability mingled with a surge of anticipation as the elevator doors opened onto a wide landing. Dim lights revealed a towering chamber filled with rows of dormant craft, sleek, silent warships reminiscent of the legends glimpsed in the murals. An entire fleet waiting in hushed slumber beneath the storm-racked surface of Aziria. Stepping into the massive hangar was like entering a myth made real. Each ship gleamed faintly under the cold lighting, their hulls adorned with the same swirling glyphs etched upon the sword's blade. The vessels were varied in size, from nimble, fighter-like craft to gargantuan cruisers, each one exuding an aura of silent potency. The hush was so profound that Damien found himself holding his breath, as if any noise might awaken sleeping giants from a forgotten age. Sala moved first, scanning one of the nearest ships. She toggled a deeper diagnostic on her handheld device, eyebrows shooting up at the readout. These are built with alloys we can't even replicate today, she noted, voice hushed with reverence. And the power cores, I'm seeing energy levels far above normal reactor signatures, but most of it is dormant, like it's waiting for a signal. Damien nodded, striding forward. I believe this sword is that signal, he said quietly, recalling the mural that showed how entire fleets answered the call of a single blade. He approached a central dais, framed by a series of tall, pillar-like structures. The dais resembled a command console, except no visible controls or screens existed. Instead, the same swirling glyphs glowed faintly across the floor. As he stepped onto it, the sword's hue shifted from cerulean to a piercing white. A surge of vertigo hit him. Images flooded his mind, humans in ancient armor, placing their hands on identical consoles, their swords raised in unison. He watched them seal away their greatest technologies, vowing they would return only when another champion worthy of their lineage appeared, someone who did not seek conquest but unity. When the vision cleared, Damien staggered slightly, and Sala rushed to steady him. "You okay?" she asked, concern lacing her words. He swallowed hard, meeting her gaze. This fleet was designed to be a shield, not a sword, he said, voice thick with emotion. It wasn't just about defeating the void entities. It was about protecting every species from them. The ships respond to human DNA, yes, but only if that human is bound, truly bound, to another species by trust, maybe even, he hesitated, searching her face, by something deeper. Salah's cheeks darkened a shade, her expression softened by the weight of his statement. She pressed her palm lightly against his chest. Well, you're not exactly alone anymore, are you? We both risked our lives for this. Whatever bond it takes, I think we have it. Her gentle confession hung in the charged air. Before either could speak further, a low rumble emanated from above. The overhead lights flickered in alarm, and the entire facility seemed to resonate with a sudden surge of external power. Sala glanced at her scanner and blanched. We've got multiple ships entering Aziria's orbit, and not the small fries. The readings suggest at least a dozen large vessels. They must have tracked that energy spike when the sword synced with this hangar. Damien's breath caught. Heritage Commission? Or maybe even larger factions. It might be the entire galaxy out there. Fear twisted in his gut, not just for himself, but for what would happen if these warships fell into the wrong hands. We need to act, now. Sala looked toward the silent fleet, then locked eyes with Damien. Then let's wake them up, she said. With her voice trembling between excitement and dread, she placed her hand over his on the sword's hilt. The dais beneath their feet lit up, and a charge of energy rippled through the hangar, illuminating every dormant vessel with an eerie, beckoning glow. As the hangar came alive, distant thunder reverberated through the facility, but Damien realized it wasn't just the planet's storms. Somewhere far above, starship engines roared, their thrusters preparing for the deployment. Through a flickering hollow display that materialized at the dais, he caught glimpses of the outside. Multiple vessels descending, wearing the markings of various galactic factions. Some belonged to the Heritage Commission, others to the Federation fleet, and still more to smaller but no less formidable powers. All converged like vultures, drawn by the gravitational pull of an artifact rumored to reshape civilizations. Sala manipulated the console, voice urgent. They're hailing us across all channels. One signal claims they want to negotiate, but the others, well, they're on standby to attack if they don't get the relic or these ships. Damien gritted his teeth. This fleet can't fall under a single group's control. My ancestors didn't build it as a tool of tyranny, but as a line of defense for everyone. He glanced at her. We have to unify them somehow, or we face another war, not just with the Heritage Commission, but between all these factions fighting over technology they barely understand. A fresh flicker from the dais interrupted him. A hologram shimmered into view, a tall figure clad in ceremonial armor that glowed like starlight. Though clearly an AI projection, the figure's face bore strong human features. DNA markers recognized, it intoned, voice resonant. Genetic signature aligns with Guardian protocols. Secondary presence confirmed. Arventi lineage. Emotional bonds meet minimum synergy thresholds. Fleet reactivation proceeding. Both Damien and Sala stared, hearts pounding. It's analyzing us, Sala whispered. The hologram nodded as if hearing her. The last time these ships awakened, humanity stood on the brink of extinction, allied with countless other species against a threat from the void. The champion who wielded the blade stood not alone but alongside those of different worlds, united by respect and ultimately by love. That synergy cannot be faked or coerced. It must be genuine, or the fleet remains dormant. Damien felt Sala's hand tighten over his own. He could sense her heartbeat, strong and steady, matching the tempo of the sword's glow. Then let's show it what we've got, he murmured. With slow deliberation, he raised the blade. Sala's other hand splayed across his chest, a supportive weight that steadied him. From the dais, lines of energy arced upward, wrapping them in a shimmering cocoon of white and blue sparks. The radiance expanded outward, connecting to each starship in the hangar. In the orbit above, the descending fleets found themselves bathed in the same glow. Comm channels crackled with confusion. Commission officers demanded an immediate cease of whatever process was in motion. Federation admirals barked orders, and private mercenary captains threatened to fire. But the swirling storms of Azyria itself grew fiercer, forming a chaotic barrier of thunderous clouds that halted any direct assault on the planet below. Within the heart of the ancient facility, Sala and Damien closed their eyes. They felt each other's presence in something larger. The collective hopes and fears of an entire galaxy on the brink of rediscovering a lost heritage. If they succeeded, they'd awaken not just warships, but the profound purpose behind them. If they failed, the fleets above would tear each other apart, and the sword's legacy would be shattered under greed and fear. A blaze of brilliance erupted across the hangar as the first ship roared to life. Its engines pulsed with the same cerulean hue as the sword, forming a halo of radiance along its curved hull. One by one, the other vessels followed suit. Small fighters, frigates, massive cruisers, each lighting up like a sunrise in the darkness. The combined hum of power reverberated through the facility, an exhilarating symphony that shook dust from ancient rafters and set the floor vibrating underfoot. Damien inhaled sharply. Through his link with the sword, he received fragments of data from the awakened fleet, battlefield tactics from millennia past, star charts that mapped out old corridors of space no longer on modern charts, and glimpses of unstoppable weapons designed to repel beings of unimaginable horror. It was both daunting and awe-inspiring. He realized how easily such power could be perverted if it fell into callous hands. Sala was similarly overwhelmed, but her scientific mind raced with possibility. She sensed the fleet's design demanded more than just a single user commanding it. These warships required multi-species crews, synergy in every station. Fuel lines, life support systems, even the AI interfaces seemed coded to accommodate the variety of physiological needs, human, Arventi, and beyond. They built it for cooperation, she murmured. It's not just that they fought alongside other races, they engineered their technology so no single species could dominate it. Above them, the sensors indicated turmoil. The Commission's capital ship had begun firing warning shots at a Federation cruiser, both jockeying for position. At least 3 smaller vessels, likely mercenaries or pirates turned opportunists, hovered near Azyria's exosphere. Tension spiked with each passing second. Then, a distortion in space opened like a wound. The dais' holodisplay picked it up instantly, a rift, ominously black at the edges, swirling with a malevolent haze. Sala's eyes widened at the reading. Damien, we have a bigger problem. He quickly understood the significance of the swirling anomaly. The murals he'd seen on the elevator walls flashed through his mind, void creatures prying open reality itself. He recalled the fleeting visions of cosmic horrors that had once threatened humanity's ancient empire. They're here, he whispered, voice taut. The same threat my ancestors warned about. Maybe the surge of energy from these ships attracted them, like a beacon in the night. Even before the watchers in orbit realized what was happening, shapes began to emerge from the breach. Distorted silhouettes flickered with an otherworldly light, their edges shimmering as though they existed partially outside normal dimensions. The Commission and Federation ships, once aimed at each other, redirected all cannons to this new threat. Bolts of plasma streaked across space, but the void entities advanced relentlessly. Sala exhaled, heartbreak etched on her face. If those things are anything like the legends say, the fleet out there stands no chance divided. She laid a hand on Damien's shoulder, eyes locking with his. We have to unify them, or watch them all be wiped out. Damien nodded, swallowing the surge of dread. He stepped toward a console that now displayed a blinking interface. Ancient or not, these ships can still help, he said. But we have to get everyone on the same page. No one else can fully activate these warships unless we share this power, this understanding. He gestured to Sala. Let's show them what it means to stand together. In the chamber's heart, Damien and Sala moved swiftly to a large command platform that flickered to life under the sword's aura. The surrounding warships adjusted positions, thrusters activating in a choreographed dance. A shimmering hollow window opened, broadcasting across every known frequency, Commission, Federation, independent captains, and even private channels. Damien's voice carried outward, amplified by the facility's ancient comm relays. This is Damien Holt, he began. I stand in the legacy of a human empire that once served as protectors of the galaxy, an empire that fell so we might all survive. These ships you see are not a bounty for the highest bidder. They're guardians, built to shield every living being from a threat that defies our reality. And that threat is here. Look at your sensors. The void entities are breaching our space right now. The feed cut to a real-time view of the breach, showing the grotesque shapes advancing on the line of orbiting ships. Faint distortion fields shimmered around them, nullifying or dispersing conventional weapons fire. A volley from the Federation cruiser splashed harmlessly, as if hitting water instead of armor. Meanwhile, the Commission flagship reeled from an energy spike that pierced its shields in a single horrifying blow. On the dais, Sala stepped forward, hand on Damien's arm for moral support. "Listen to us," she said, voice clear and resonant. "We can activate these warships fully, but only if humans and non-humans unite in purpose. This technology was coded to respond to mutual trust, and yes, even love, between species. It's the only way the system recognizes us as worthy. We need every faction, every species, to set aside your quarrels and join forces, or the void entities will tear us apart." There was a beat of silence, punctuated by distant thunder and the hum of awakened engines. Then, transmission by transmission, voices responded. A Federation admiral, sounding shaken, ordered her subordinates to hold fire on the Commission and focus on the rift. A gruff commission sergeant relayed a request for a ceasefire, acknowledging they had bigger concerns. Smaller captains chimed in, some grudging, some fervent, agreeing to stand down from their petty hostilities. One by one, they pivoted formation to form a defensive ring around Aziria. Damien felt a surge of hope. "Here we go," he murmured, guiding the sword to a wide slot in the console. It fit perfectly, snapping into place with a flare of blinding light. At once, an orchestral hum reverberated through the hangar. The newly awakened warships responded to the console, and a final wave of power rippled through their hulls. In the orbit above, the void entities slowed, seemingly aware that something monumental had shifted. A large hangar door spiraled open overhead, revealing the storm-racked sky. One by one, the ancient vessels began to ascend, their engines forging a safe passage through the roiling clouds. Outside, the storms parted as if commanded by an unseen hand, offering a corridor for the newly awakened armada. In the cockpit of each vessel, shimmering control panels lit up with instructions. The ships needed multiple life signatures from multiple species. This forced quick cooperation. Commission enforcers ended up working alongside Federation pilots, while independent mercenaries partnered with intrepid explorers. Gaps in trust had to be bridged on the fly as the swirling energies demanded synergy to power weapons and shields. Damien felt Sala's hand slip into his own. Together, they stepped onto a lift that brought them into the command deck of the grandest cruiser, a flagship thrumming with cosmic potential. As they took their stations, Sala at the helm, Damien at a central console, they could sense the swirl of countless minds uniting across the comm channels. For the first time in an age, humanity's ancient fleet soared once more, and this time they were not alone. From my own perspective, this entire journey has been an eye-opening testament to the boundless spirit of collaboration and unity. Damien's sword, once lodged on a remote planet, didn't just unlock forgotten technology. It revealed how cooperation between species can overcome greed, fear, and even cosmic horrors. The harrowing space battles, the hidden fleet waiting beneath tempestuous skies, and the alliance formed in the face of an otherworldly threat all underscore a single truth. Courage and trust can shape a better future for everyone. I hope this story has left you as inspired as it has left me. What do you think of the events and characters? Feel free to leave a comment and share your thoughts or theories. Let's keep the discussion going. Your insights are what make these stories truly come alive.